We're going to go ahead and get started here. Can I just get a sound check that someone can hear me?
Yes, sir.
All good.
All right, thank you very much. So do want to run through our sponsors real quick, thank them for their support. I know we just outlined them in track one, but for those who maybe didn't join opening remarks, we really couldn't do this without our sponsors today. So really thankful for Elliott Davis, Fortalis, Utilsec, Lucy, Secure Ideas, Dutonomy, Checkpoint, Tech Refresh, Fortinet, Craig, Hook Security, Secure IT, Corelight, CrowdStrike, DEF CON, Kivu, and North Greenville University cybersecurity program. So really thankful for all of them, their support this year coming out and supporting us in our virtual B-Sides. We're going to go ahead and get started since we're already 5 minutes late coming off opening remarks. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak today to kick us off. So my name is Ryan Baisley. I'm going to be our first speaker this morning, then we'll hand it over to the rest of the day. Talk today is lessons learned from my time in security operations. I had the distinct privilege of doing some consulting work for two large life science organizations. I really want to share some of the lessons learned today from my experience there. This is definitely interactive, and if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And then I will try to address those there at the end. And if there's any comments or whatever, also remember to use the Discord for some chat and communication ongoing afterwards. I'll be around throughout the day, so look forward to that. So we'll go ahead and get jumped in. So just quick intro. Many of you may not know who I am. I'm a husband, a father. I am a consultant. I consider myself a relationship builder. I am a born-again Christian, so that really formulates all I do. It's at the center there. I'm a lifelong learner. I love working with nonprofits. I am one of our BSidesGVL organizers, and I love to travel. So in consulting, one of the opportunities I had was really defining a personal purpose, and I thought this was important because it kind of sets up, who I am, what I do, and drives into really the purpose of this talk. And so really my purpose is to find life's meaning so that we boldly reveal our true selves. And when at my best, I bring my purpose to life, guided by a set of actions. So I ask a lot of questions, I try to encourage others, and I try to serve others as much as possible. And by living my purpose every day, I actively build a world, and I imagine a world in which people can seek out new opportunities that challenge their potential, where people feel validated in their decision-making after receiving counsel and being encouraged, and that people consider thoughtfully on what they want and are empowered to pursue their desires. And this talk today really is to try and help people maybe experience a side of security. We get a lot of students in these conversations, which we really appreciate, people who are trying to enter the field and people who are well into their career, maybe looking for a change. And so I hope that some lessons from today can help you understand and maybe challenge that potential that you have. So the purpose for today, we're going to explore some of the lessons learned from security operations. I'm going to share about the life I lived working in security operations. And then at the end of the day, we're going to try and encourage people maybe to give SecOps a try. So the first lesson we're going to talk about is an operating model. And the operating model is really how an organization is structured. And so like I said, I had the opportunity to work at two life science organizations, very large global entities. And the first organization where I experienced security monitoring, they had the following operating model. So they had a US team lead, and they had 12 analysts using an outsourced SOC from a leading SOC provider. They operated 24/7. In the second organization I experienced, they had a slightly different model where they actually had a US team lead still, but then they had in-source analysts in what they called GDCs, or global delivery centers. And so they had 4 to 8 analysts in Mexico, and then they had 4 to 8 analysts in India. And each team would cover 13 hours or so in Mexico, 14 hours in India, just based on the time differences and such. And this really shared service model they were all in the same place. That was pre-COVID. Once COVID happened, they all went home. But it was, this shared delivery center was more than just security operations. It was your networking team. It was people who were over email. And I found this really, an interesting concept, one I hadn't experienced before. And so the second organization, when I started, they were doing this 24/7 by 365. But one of the things that I encountered really quickly when I was there was the organization had some challenging retention issues, I guess we could say. And they actually had to move back to a 24/5 model and escape those weekend days. So I learned here that varying operating models can work whether in-house or outsourced. They both operated well. I did feel that the bond of having this in-house team was much stronger with the team leads and with myself. There was much more chemistry. I felt the team operated, at least in my opinion, and from what I experienced, at a higher level. Some of the challenges that these organizations faced, both of them, even in Mexico, Romania, India, was, we see this here in the US as well, as recruiting and retaining talent. The going rate in Mexico and India for talent had gone up significantly. And the organization I was working with had faced some legacy HR challenges with finding equitable pay based on current data. And so, it was people were finding that they could go out and make more somewhere else. And so they were losing these people. One other thing I found interesting was in India, they actually have a 90-day notice period. And so what you would find happening is someone would give their notice, and then they would go in, they would shop around. So they may give their notice and have an offer in hand. And once they do that, they start shopping around for another offer that's higher. And so you would find people who you think you had on the hook to take your job or take an opportunity in open rec, and then they would be gone because they'd find something else that was more lucrative for them. So it was something that was interesting that I hadn't experienced before, due to that very lengthy notice period that's in India. So the second lesson learned was really the importance of having process. And in the second organization I worked with, this was a lion's share of what I was responsible for doing. So we were responsible for building these triage playbooks. These were focused more on actioning alerts and trying to weed out the noise and known behavior. We had created a known behavior OneNote. You could use any note-taking tool that could be easily shared across the team. But this known behavior OneNote was something we used very regularly in triaging incidents in their EDR platform. Included items like known executables that may flag something, known programs, internal red team boxes, vulnerability boxes that, if you saw something coming off, it would, light up like a Christmas tree, but really was internal activity. We also had a known malicious behavior OneNote as well. And we tracked in their behavior based on MITRE and the attack framework, what analysts would kind of review alerts against. We also created these investigation playbooks. And so these were focused more on deeper analysis. But we had originally set out to match these categories outlined in the Verizon data breach incident report. We ended up scaling that back to roughly 3 playbooks that we felt like encompassed a majority of potential incidents. And in our categories, we ended up with malware, DDoS, and a bucket of other. And really we had a couple key questions to answer, and it took us a bit of time to kind of fine tune these and what we were trying to accomplish. So our key questions we ended up with were, is this ransomware or credential theft? Has the activity been automatically blocked by a tool? Is the activity new? Is the activity spreading, or is it localized? Is the activity malicious? What's the source? And is the threat action internal or external? And so we tried to formulate questions and processes without being too prescriptive for the analyst, but enough to give them to try and march down these questions to identify if something really was malicious and needed to be actioned or quarantined. The next thing we did is we created operations playbooks, and these really focused on tool-specific actions and tasks, maybe better titled job aids in some organizations. So we had a daily handoff, between Mexico and India that we had a defined process for. ServiceNow, how to enter tickets, various security tools, metrics and reporting, and then non-standard software. Also developed some threat hunts. They were focused on specific tools. We had one for email threat hunting, one for LOL bins or living off the land binaries. And we also had a specific one at the time. There was a big influx of TrickBot activity. So we developed a specific TrickBot threat hunt, as that was a prime item, if you remember back in about a year and a half ago, against the health sciences organizations as things were picking up with COVID. One of the things I also actually learned this from one of my colleagues in India was having this concept and idea and document of an IR or a SOC cover book. And this was one item that we added late in the engagement. And it was really an operations guide that contained a list of everything a new individual might need. So it was the perfect document for this new hire. It contained, the org chart. It contained what tools were used, documentation repositories, who was on the team, where they were on the team, because we had found that, we had a new hire come in India. So that person knew the India team fairly well, but that person maybe had no clue who the person in the Mexico team was, because this organization, the reporting structures didn't actually go up to the team leads. They had managers in those delivery centers where everyone reported. So we found this to be really helpful in people getting acclimated to the environment really quickly. So lessons learned here. You cannot document enough, especially once the team lost these experienced analysts from that attrition that they'd gone through and retention issues. That documentation played a key role in keeping the team engaged and up to date and what was going on and what they needed to do. Really, we need to be thorough and think about what the new hires are going to need. We knew once someone got into the swing of things, they were going to be able to go through the investigation. It was going to be kind of that, rote memory. They were going to know. But we had to provide that initial foundation. Then my colleague had these three terms that, they stick with me, the ABC: accuracy, brevity, and clarity. Keep those principles in mind when you're working through your documentation. One of the challenges we faced was knowing just simply what documentation to nix and what to keep and where to condense and where to combine. People find this, you have so much documentation sometimes, how do you make it actionable and usable? This was a challenge that we faced, and we decided to, like I said, consolidate some of that documentation into just those three investigation playbooks. So here's I got a couple examples of just some quick process flow charts that we developed. We found that having different flow charts was very helpful for an analyst who would visually represent and be able to identify the information they needed. This was underpinned by some of that more extensive written documentation. I've seen this in multiple organizations and how they do that. I had a great colleague who was able to develop these with great precision and accuracy. So this was one we had developed for the EDR platform. And then this was one we had developed for the messaging platform and how to evaluate email. Next thing that we're going to talk about is simple reporting and keeping track of things. There's so much information that's going on. And so we had to come up with some ways to track everything that was going on. And one of the big tools we used was OneNote. We used this for major incidents, where we would track after a triage what was happening and realizing if something was bigger than a normal incident, it could be triaged out or investigated in 15, 20, 30 minutes with maybe a little larger of an impact. We'd open up a OneNote. So we'd start timelining what happened. We'd have a decision log or a tree, really almost thinking of like a RAID log, basically. What risks are we facing? What are potential issues? What assumptions are we making up to that point? And then what decisions and actions are we taking? We draft incident summaries. It was a great place that the team could add information, draft those incident summaries that could then be elevated up to senior leadership. We also had daily handoff reporting. This was really a summary document of incidents found during the day, what hunts the team was doing as far as threat hunts, what needed to be handed off and picked up. Again, we used OneNote for this, found it to be really great. We would go through those OneNotes for the daily handoffs when we had our daily shift handoff calls, and the team would kind of keep a pulse on what was going on via that way. Yeah, most organizations, tracking stuff via tickets, ServiceNow, Sharewell, Jira, whatever it may be, keeping that stuff updated with information. If you're able to build that out and kind of dice out certain fields, that makes reporting so much easier. We also had a daily shift checklist. So this would actually supplement our operations guide on the daily handoff. It was really just a checklist of kind of a prioritized list of where the team should start their day. Check the SOC hotline, check any relevant email inboxes if you have a security mailbox, reviewing tools in certain orders. And then we had a weekly status update. So we had the daily and then we had the weekly. And the weekly was a little bit higher level, a little bit elevated. So we gather highlights from the week. We talk about maybe HR, people development. We'd review any new threat intel that came across from their internal CTI team. We'd go over items of interest. And then if there were any IT ops related issues, we would discuss those as well. So lessons learned here. Much can happen over the course of the day, let alone a week or a month. And we found that this OneNote really helped us, kind of keep track. And it was really easily searchable to go back through and look for a specific host name or look for a application name and maybe what incident. Then we could go back to the EDR tool, or we could then use that as a launching point into the ticketing tool to go do a deeper investigation, get some historical information on something. Look for anomalous metrics. We're tracking all that metric. Look for something that's anomalous. What is rare in your environment? Encourage your teams to document extensively what they find during the investigations. Put as much information, as feasible, and that doesn't impact, speed of execution into tickets, because you'll find that information later to be super valuable. Challenges we face: documentation, getting analysts to actually update with extensive notes throughout the investigation. They'd keep an incident report on their desktop. They'd be going through their thing and they'd pick it up the next day, but sometimes they'd fail to update what they'd found in that report into the ticket. And so during handoff or a weekend or a holiday, some of this handover information that would be good for the person, they wouldn't have it because it'd be on the desktop of the analyst. Transition to operations. This was one I actually learned at the first organization. We were doing a managed MSSP migration, basically. It merged with two companies. And so we had to find a way to figure out everything that they managed and then moving it over to the new organization. And so we developed this thing called TOPS, or Transition to Operations. And so it was an Excel spreadsheet. It lists out each service offering, each service area, what the product was, and then we would just track it across when we migrated it to the new organization. So what does TOPS include? Well, it includes things like architecture diagrams, wiring diagrams, IP and URL information, vendor and admin manuals, important processes such as health checks, break fix, config and change management, patch management, user management, any quotes that were going back and forth, copy of backup configurations if we were talking about a product like a firewall or any type of CASB tool. We'd schedule functionality training between the two teams to make sure that Team B, who was coming on board, knew what in the world was going on in the organization. And we kind of built this out into phases. So there was really the plan phase, thinking from a project management perspective. We had the plan. We were building out how to transition, what the products were going to be, what end products we wanted to have. And then there was this transition phase. And we really did it in two parts, I'd say. So we did what we called a passive parallel run, where both organizations were running at the same time. Organization A, the primary, kind of still doing the day-to-day, but organization B was kind of watching over the shoulder. And then once we were ready to transition, we moved into what we called hypercare. And so this was really kind of the transition point where everything moved to B and they were running it, and A was now there kind of looking over the shoulder until the term date of the contract where A would no longer be there. Here's just a quick glance at what our tops looked like. Simple spreadsheet. It gives you some ideas of what you can do there and help track to make sure that your next transition of a tool or a service is successful. Next thing we're talking about is training people. Training is super important. And what we did here at the second organization I worked with is we actually developed a skills matrix, a training catalog, you could say. And we had listed out 20 different skills, and we developed a skills catalog. And then we took those skills and we mapped opportunities and training content, free training content to them. You see the Discord and stuff. There's sand stuff, and some of that's expensive and free, but they're offering free courses now. This is like B-sides material and stuff maybe from a Mandiant conference that's out there. And so we built that into these kind of big high-level areas, skills, and then the matching training content to go with it. And so let me show you an example here of kind of what we did. So it gives you an idea. This was a catalog then we would deliver to the team. And then as they had time, we had set out some required training, so they could go through certain of these. And then if they had extra time or if they wanted to go learn on their own, this was additional content we found that based on these skill areas, they could work through and match to learn what the skill was. The team also did external training. Now, one of the challenges we did find was, so the training provider was based here in the US. We had people in Mexico, we had people in India. So to get everyone on the same training schedule, we really had to kind of flip the India schedule to a later day. And we would start at 6 Central in the morning, 6 a.m. Central, and then we would go to, it was like noon or 2. But noon or 2, I don't remember which time in India, it's like midnight for those folks. So they have really late evenings. So obviously, that was what we had to do to make that work for both teams. Definitely a challenge we faced. I would say the lesson learned there is, figure out that right timing if you're using those type of delivery models or operating models with people in geographic areas and you have to do it that way. But also make sure that those folks don't have to work. So when we did training, they did training. 8 hours for training in the day, labs afterwards, and they were done. Everyone supported one another on the team, where those who weren't working or those who weren't training, they were the ones working that week. And then when they got the opportunity to train the following week, we flipped it. So they never had to worry about what was going on in the estate. Next thing we're going to talk about is the life of the packet. And I actually had the opportunity to do this on some internal initiatives. And I learned that this gentleman who kind of developed this concept, he used to run the Cisco stock, and he termed it the life of the packet. And so you break down your framework into really 3 areas: operational, tactical, and strategic. So operational, you map each of your data sources to an outcome. What do you hope to gain? What do you hope to happen? So, for example, and when I get to the next slide, you'll see it and it'll make a little more sense, I think. But for like your network operations, you have your Cisco stuff or your Juniper stuff. For IT operations, you have your servers, you have domain controllers. For security, you have your endpoint. Your endpoint data is coming in, firewall logs, network activity, Windows logs. I jumped there. Hold on. There we go. Windows logons and who's logging on, you know, your 4624s, your 4625s, processes being created on a host. You have your tactical stuff. Okay, so it's kind of that next level. So think of it going across vertically on your screen. Tactical is really that time to detection. So you have the right data sources. Now you got to map those to the right skill set. So you got to have your Windows expert. You got to have your firewall expert. So you map that skill set, and then you map that to the outcome. Okay, so going back to the NetOps Cisco, what information are you going to gather there? You're going to gather IP address, port from your servers and your domain controllers. You're going to gather DNS information, DHCP, account info, asset and subnet information. From your endpoints, you'll gather host names, hashes, URLs. All right. So then you move into that strategic bucket. This is your time to mitigation. And this is where you work to automate the known and investigate the unknown. And then he had these 3 vectors of threats that he would talk about. So you can only have 3 vectors of threats. You can have internal to internal to external, or external to internal. Anytime you're talking about a threat, it's going to be one of those 3 vectors. All right, so here's a view of life of the packet, okay? So you see across the top, this is a huge Visio sheet. So it doesn't accomplish all of it, but you see your NetOps stuff. So you got your Cisco, you got, you know, your various tools, you got your IT ops, you got your servers, domain controllers, and then all of the information that kind of feeds into that. You're feeding that into your SIM. That helps you make the tactical discussions. You know, you got your information, domains, ports, IPs, statuses, what domain, what's the DNS, and then you can move that into, you know, alerts, case numbers, and then that's where you move into the strategic. You know, what can you automate if you're remediating stuff, and what do you need to investigate? I think this is my final item here, and this is being introspective with data. So in the second organization I worked with, really we had all these processes. One of the things we really tried to dive into is looking into the data. What types of alerts were we getting? What were the hosts? What hosts were receiving the alerts? Were there specific geographies that were receiving more alerts than others? Or were there specific business units, or even down to the people of where people were receiving alerts or detections? And then we tried to figure out if there were any trends. So one of the things we did is trying to figure out what was rare in the environment, what occurred very, very little. And so one of these items we did was we looked at LOL bins, or these living off the land binaries, and what occurred very infrequently in the environment. And if we found one, we would do an investigation. So something like PowerShell in your environment most likely is happening so many times a day that if you just tried to filter out PowerShell, it's not going to be actionable. But maybe something like at.exe or bits admin occurs once in 30 days. Why does that occur on every 30 days? Is it a specific host? Does it jump around? Or is it really an adversary? So one of the other things we looked at were potentially IPs or domain names that are common. So looking at long domain names, or if something was, say, in like certutil, calling out to an IP, you know, those would be very uncommon behaviors in the LOL bins. Those could be potentially malicious. And so we would look for those rare items and try and filter those out. So this goes back to documenting those alerts, types, locations, and making sure to document that threat intel over time. You may have something that doesn't look right now or doesn't fit a profile now, but maybe down the road it's something you see in your environment. Challenges we faced here: finding rare can be really hard in a large environment. especially if your teams don't know what good or bad looks like. Thankfully, at this organization, we did have one individual who was kind of the internal red team. And so he coached us along on things he would do, processes he would use. We were going through purple team exercises and trying to find those detections in the EDR tool. And then we talk about what we did. And so one of these items was obviously base 64 encoded PowerShell, but not all base 64 encoded PowerShell is bad. Some of it's used by system administrators to do legitimate things based on, long, complex commands they need to run. So what we did with that is we made a list of known good encoded strings. And then once you're kind of investigating that, you can say, oh yeah, those start with the first four, end with the last four. That's known good. But then we'd also, those ones that we didn't know, those would be the ones we'd have to throw into CyberChef or some other tool to decode and see what was actually happening. Know how frequently something like invoke expression or IEX is being used in your environment if you're able to search at a command line level. Looking for things that accompany string. And then one of the ones we also did was looking at run DLL 32. So run DLL 32 is if you're starting a DLL through the command line, which is typically abnormal, it has to include the word start or space start. And so we could formulate a command in the EDR tool to look for the binary run DLL 32 and then include command line start or space start. We were able to find some potentially malicious things that way and have the teams investigate further. So this is just a simple, we listed out all the binaries and we developed searches for them. This maps to the LOL bin project. You can find it out on GitHub. Cisco's got an article right up about top 13 binaries used by adversaries. It's a few years old, but still's got some good information in it. And then what we do is we go there on, you see the far right side, you see the volume. So how often did this occur in the environment? And so we'd run a search like that, it includes multiple binaries there, but we'd look for file name and command line. We may have a couple and it would be a quick run through on the day, does anything look malicious here? So that concludes the talk for this morning. Any questions come up? Anything stand out to you? Anything as a nugget maybe you'll take back on Monday to your teams from a lesson learned that you'd like to share with the group? Really do appreciate everyone's time this morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Any questions? Let me read back through the Discord here real quick. CMap Tools is a free tool for flowcharts and concept maps if you don't have access to Visio. Check the chat here. Quantum has a strong OneNote documentation program. Yep. It could be Evernote, it could be OneNote. OneNote's so simple these days. It ties into Teams, thick clients on your computer. We found that especially if you're going through an incident, you may think you have compromise in your environment. OneNote's a simple thing you could easily stand up if you're in a disconnected 365 tenant, or you need to stand up a secondary tenant to run an incident, or if you have certain tools in place that the team could quickly stand up, start writing down notes, what's going on. I don't know if I found something better than OneNote to date yet. It's really easy to, and the other thing, like I said, going back and searching, because the team, when they would document incidents in that daily handoff, we would kind of have them write out just a one-liner on incidents, host name, application that may have gotten flagged, being able to quickly go into OneNote and type out that application name and see if it's occurred in previous days or previous weeks, or if it's something that occurred 3 months ago, was a great jumping point to reference a ServiceNow ticket and go find. All right, well, really appreciate everyone.